Did that kill it? I can see you though.
Welcome everybody to Startup Hype Man's Discover Your Inner Awesome podcast. My name is Rajiv Nathan, aka The Raj Nation. I am your show's host and the founder and creative force behind Startup Hype Man, helping startups everywhere build their hype by creating a message that sings. This is Discover Your Inner Awesome, the only show where you get to eavesdrop on conversations with entrepreneurs, artists, and musicians about the stories, the journeys, the struggles, but most importantly, the questions. The questions that help creative thinkers like you and I better understand who we are, what we're doing, and how we can do it better. It's about the mindset, processes, and strategies to help you build a bad. Now, before we dive into today's conversation, I would like to extend an invitation to join our tribe at startuphypeman.com. Enter your email address there, and you will never miss another episode of this show, getting an email in your inbox every single week when we drop new episodes on Mondays. You'll also get my weekly thoughts, strategies, and ideas on how to build up your hype and create a raving fan base. All right, let's dive in now to this week's conversation of Discover Your Inner Awesome. Welcome, everybody, to Discover Your Inner Awesome. Today on the show, we have with us Lucas Guariglia. Lucas is the co-founder, president, and director of sales at Rowboat Creative. Lucas, thank you for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
I'm excited to have you. We were actually introduced by Rob Cressy, who was on the show last season in one of my all-time favorite episodes. So if he endorses you, that means we're off to a good start already.
Yeah, Rob's an awesome guy. I mean, we've known each other forever. And, as we were kind of talking prelim before jumping into this, we're just constantly always trading the entrepreneurial roadblocks and glories and celebrations and everything along the way. So certainly glad that he hooked us into to each other, because I think that everybody, we're all kind of in the same mental space of, just being wanted to be networked with everybody and, sharing kind of some of the paths of being an entrepreneur and either making it happen or not making it happen at times.
You said roadblocks, glories, and everything along the way. That's like literally what this show is about. So let's dive in. Our topic today is, how do you survive a pivot? Why is this on your mind? Why is this important to you?
The biggest thing, I've been doing a lot of public speaking and kind of in different spaces and atmospheres, ranging from people specifically in companies in our industry too, but also ranging to graduate classes at School of the Art Institute, Columbia College, and even down to high schools and even grade schools. And a lot of the time, I go into those situations and those speaking opportunities, and some of them are a little bit more pointed to, specifically to the demographic, and whether that's a little bit more business pointed or entrepreneurial or not. But I found myself consistently kind of rooting back to that idea of the pivot, and and explaining that along the road of whether that's your business venture or your dreams or whatever that is, that the pivot, I guess the pivot point really kind of comes into play. And so in understanding and kind of, I don't know if that's revitalizing everybody else's ideas that it is okay to pivot, that if you find yourself at one of those roadblocks, or you find yourself just kind of at the end of that road where, either it's not working or you need to kind of figure out a different approach to something, that's okay. And that doesn't mean that, it's the end of the world, it's the end of the road, or that you failed, because, being able to pivot and head in a little bit of a different direction or a complete different direction, or veering off that immediate course and, jumping back onto it later down the line. I think that's just a really important part, I think, of just, the world in general, but also kind of the entrepreneurial, path too, I guess, in life.
To borrow from the basketball world, when you pivot, it's when you've been dribbling, you stop, you pick up your dribble, and then you have one foot down and the other foot is essentially like rotating around. I'm assuming that's where the entrepreneurial world got the term pivot from. I could be wrong. But That said, in order to pivot, you have to first be dribbling, which means you have to first get on the court, which means you have to first be involved in the game in the first place. So let's take it back a little bit, and maybe a long bit. You tell me. But Lucas, where did you grow up? Not only like city, but in terms of environment you were in. Where did you grow up, and how do you feel that began to shape you?
Sure. That's a perfect, actually, example. I came from kind of an athletic background too, and so I mean we can get back to that too. But I grew up in Chicago, grew up in Rogers Park area, and it was just a really, I mean, it was kind of, I mean, now has gentrified even more, as much of Chicago has, but it was a really diverse neighborhood. I mean, I had, I had athlete friends. I was always, I was like the skater kid. So, I was kind of in that realm too. And then I had, some of the rougher and tougher city kids and, some of the gangbanger kids. And, I think that, I mean, I come from kind of a very, a very musical family, but kind of a very open-minded artistic family too. And I think, a lot of the rooting is from there too, but just growing up in that atmosphere, I think just exposed me to a lot of different things. I mean, even we'll delve kind of deeper into the music side of it too. But, I was growing up with friends who are listening to hip hop, friends who are listening to R&B, friends who are listening to metal and, kind of all over the place. And so I think that really early on, that kind of exposed me to just obviously understanding how large and diverse the world is too, but also, beginning to kind of cultivate who I am as a person and, what my beliefs and goals and morals all are, but also realizing that, I could take little aspects of different people and different vibes and, different kind of sections of, I guess, the world and universe and kind of meld those into what is my own and, what I agree with and what I disagree with and what are my dislikes and my likes, I guess.
Of those genres that you mentioned, you had friends listening to metal, hip hop, R&B, rock. Which genre did you gravitate towards?
The funny thing is that, so my, both my mom and dad, they were in a band together when I was growing up that was more rock based.
Like your mom and dad played in the same band.
They were in the same band. And then ironically, when I got deeper into it, my dad was actually, he started the band with me that, we went on to do a lot of touring and, a lot bigger stuff too. But, so I kind of grew up around, I mean, they were always in kind of the rock world. And I grew up more specifically exposed, I guess, to a lot more R&B and hip hop. I mean, that was the stuff that I really gravitated towards like early on. I was a huge Boyz II Men fan, huge Bone Thugs and Harmony, huge, Dr. Dre and all that. Yeah. And I really didn't even I never even got into rock until about like 7th grade. And that's when I was exposed to, when all the new metal stuff and Korn and Deftones and all that stuff was coming out. And I think that it was just, it was just a different experience to me because I had never been, no one really knew what that music was. And actually I remember, I mean, my dad and I we would go to Ozfest, pretty regularly every year. And back when Lollapalooza was still a big touring, not just 1 day or 3-day festival now. But it was just an interesting kind of curve for me because I think all along the lines being exposed to something and kind of having this aha moment of I don't even know what this is. And then really diving into it and, immersing myself into it. And I even find, I mean, in the last three to 5 years, I've finally been exposed a little bit more to country music because it's been so enormous. My better half is from North Carolina, and so I found myself kind of re-immersing myself into country music, which I would have never ever imagined in a million years. But trying to just expose myself to different things and understanding that obviously there's a reason why a gazillion people are into country music. I was seemingly missing something.
As I learned 4 or 5 years ago when I did an experiment of listening to only country for 30 days, it is exactly the same thing as hip hop. just
Yeah,
different musically, but they're all talking about girls. They're all talking about their problems.
right, and whiskey.
And yeah, getting drunk, and they're
Yeah,
also telling stories, which is the basis of hip hop and what
right.
appears to be the basis of country as well.
It's not 40s, it's whiskey.
Exactly. Yeah, just different alcohol preference.
Right.
Okay, you said you and your dad started a band together.
Correct.
We can't gloss over that. Tell us about that, and especially one that's influenced by like Corn. I'm like, I'm trying to picture a dad being into Corn, so this is interesting to me.
Yeah, it was crazy. So so he, I grew up kind of learning from him. I mean, he's such an amazingly talented musician. And so my mom was the singer in the band, and so that's where I kind of, I got kind of my vocal roots from her. He plays a million different stringed instruments, so he taught me how to play guitar. And so back then in high school, I mean, we started. The project was called Lift Point, and I started putting it together towards the end of freshman year. And my high school it wasn't kind of a big arts and music scene, so I was kind of trying to pull anybody that I could, to try to get this project together. And nobody really wanted to go as hard at it as I did, so I couldn't really find anybody that was that committed. And so it was just kind of an easier situation to say, "Hey, Dad, I'm writing these songs. Would it be possible for you just to sit?" I mean, he was playing guitar in his band, and I wanted to play guitar, and I actually wasn't even really thinking about singing in my band, but there was nobody else to basically fill that void. So I kind of took the role of guitar and vocals, and then put him on bass. And then we didn't have a drummer at the time, so we were basically just borrowing the drummer of his band at the time. And so we would come in, and before they would have rehearsals, we'd kind of play through like the 2 or 3 original songs that I had. We were doing a couple different covers from, we didn't do any Corn covers, but we covered Deftones back then. We had a couple Stain songs. I think we did a Foo Fighters song. Yeah. Back before he went country, they were still in the heavier scene, but yeah, it was crazy. It was a really interesting experience because, it kind of started kind of on a whim. And, we took it pretty far. And I mean, he was with us for the first, 5-6 years. And so we were getting bigger locally, and then we started touring kind of regionally. And, so it was just a great experience to be able to be able to play with my dad, and just to have all those experience and share kind of the growing experience too. I mean, granted, there was also some friction moments because that was just, in my teenage angst years. And so it was a weird dichotomy of, being in a situation that I was kind of commanding. And so we had many an argument and many a weird exchange, like in practice, where, I was kind of coming down on him because he was playing something wrong. And it was just like a weird role reversal situation.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I'm wondering too, like, what's touring with your dad like? And if you're in high school at the time, is it like, you go to a city and then you need to like get lunch or dinner. So you're like, "Dad, you're getting this, right?"
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was just, we've always been super, super close. So, it was never kind of a weird situation. It was just more so, I guess the situation in general was kind of interesting and bizarre to people. I mean, we'd go and we'd play, various different college towns and different radio shows, and, whether we would do like meet and greets or, signings before or after. And, it was only a 3-piece band. So it would be me and, 2 other people, and we'd play, and everybody would come up and be like, "Oh, it looks like you guys have kind of an age gap going on here." I was like, "Yeah, well, that's actually my dad." And so then everybody was completely kind of floored by that too. So yeah, it was definitely an amazing experience. And, one of the hardest points was getting to, we were just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and, he couldn't kind of step away from his normal life to be able to, to join a full-time rock band. So we had the last show that we played in Chicago with him was at Double Door. And I remember I still have the set list and like some of the guitar picks from that show. And it was just kind of like a bittersweet moment, when we knew that we had to just kind of push a little bit more forward because he was obviously behind us 100%. And, it was kind of a weird situation and heartbreaking situation, but very, very cool experience though.
And rest in peace, Double Door at that. A great venue
Yeah,
that closed its
yeah,
doors.
absolutely.
Closed both of its double doors.
And yeah, all the doors.
You said you got big. Like how? Like I don't know if it's easy to quantify that, but how big would you say the band got?
So we were hitting the touring circuit pretty hard. I mean, we were doing a lot of touring with Chevelle. We were doing a lot of touring with, there was Kill Hannah, and Chevelle was probably the last of the larger tours, but
yeah, that's a pretty big time name.
Yeah, I mean, all the kind of the heavy hitters back in that realm, Taproot and 10 Years and, all that. I could go on for days, but that might date me even more. But we, I guess the coining moment, we played, the biggest show we ever played was in Cincinnati, Ohio. And there was about 6,000 people there. And, this is actually kind of one of the moments that I also touch on a lot in any of kind of the speaking situations too, because if I had, there's many occasions in life that I wish I could go back to and take it in a little bit more. But that honestly is one of the quintessential moments where I wish that I just had a little bit more time to really step back and, to take all that in. I think for so many reasons, and, this applies in so many different scenarios, but for me, that moment, there was literally so many people that I could only see past, a certain amount. And then the crowd just kept going. And it was a really funny show because we actually, as soon as we came out to play, literally the first big chord that I hit, my strap lock popped. And so the guitar fell, hit the ground. And I just remember thinking to myself, these people are going to absolutely eat us alive now. And it was like the heavier rock crowd, so they're not the most polite in certain situations. So I kind of turned back to our guitar tech, and I was just like, we have to fix this. And so he grabbed some gaff tape, and we kind of just taped it back together. And I stepped back up to the mic, and I was like, "Do you guys mind if we try that again?" And like the roar of the crowd was kind of just overwhelming at that point. And then we did our thing, but that was just the moment where now in retrospect, I look back and I think that, there's so many people out there who dream to, either have the ability or have the talent to pick up a guitar and learn to play. There's so many people who then want to take the next step and say, I want to write original material and share that with people and, get the balls to actually do that with somebody and then, take it further and further. And, for us to get to that point and, to be blessed with enough talent and enough, just support structure to be able to do that. And people who are into the material was another thing. And, at that point, and this is also something that, kind of points back to my entrepreneurial, I guess, mentality of just, never, I guess something is never enough, and you're constantly focused on what is the next big move and the next big picture and the next, getting to that next revenue point and then the bigger one. And we want more of this. We want more employees. We want more square footage. And that's all great. But I think that at a certain point, really staying grounded and being able to step back from those things and see what you've built and, really appreciate those moments because, not to get all, ethereal and sentimental, but once those moments are gone, you can't go back to those.
Yeah, and I think it's for entrepreneur. In one sense, it's like the music sense, right? But that's so applicable to the entrepreneurial journey, especially when you're grinding it out every day. It's so hard to take that step back and actually like celebrate a win, however big or small that might be.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's. I think that everybody just. As a world, we tend to miss that. And I think that, because of everybody's attention spans and, social media and everything is it's so quick to eat up and quick to feed. And if you don't step back, and I'm still guilty of this 500% of the time. And I really do try to every time just really step back and realize things. And, I take a lot from my grandfather started a business out of the back of his car. And it grew to be a pretty enormous operation on the East Coast. And he passed away a couple years ago, and it was just a situation that, towards the end of his life and all the business conversations and, all the conversations that we had, and, he would check in on me every now and then, how's the business doing? How's the business doing? And his big thing was if you got to year 5, you were going to be okay, because at that point you either figured it out or you figured it out enough to be able to lie to people to convince people that you had it figured out. But, it was just another one of those moments where it was like, towards the end of his life, the most important things were being surrounded by his family and, all the tangible things that you work towards, whether that's in your scope or in your path to say that I want to have all of these things, and I want to have boats, and I want to have houses, and, all of these things that in the end, are just kind of materialistic objects that don't really, as far as we all know, those aren't coming with us, to wherever we're all going.
Thus far, so, our overall topic today is on surviving a pivot. Thus far, I've as you've spoken, I've heard 2 pivots, one mini, one bigger come out. Well, the bigger one would have been when your dad had to leave the band. Actually, to me, that's a pivot and having to figure out what to do next. The smaller one was your guitar strap breaking on stage, and in that moment, that's a mini pivot right there, right? It's like, what do we do now? And then you get some duct tape basically and you play on.
That was a huge, oh shit pivot.
Yeah. I would guess, correct me if I'm wrong here. So you end up going to DePaul University to get your bachelor's degree. You and I are both fellow Blue Demon alumni.
All right.
Which means we've both, you mentioned you played basketball before, so you probably were good enough to play on DePaul's team at one point.
Yeah, something there. Or that just means we both hung out at Halligan at a lot of
exactly. So I feel like your big pivot now comes in departing from the music world, right? Because you it's not what you're doing now. And maybe when I introduced you at the beginning, I should have also included rock star extraordinaire as one of your titles. But you end up entering the workforce, so to speak, and then Rowboat Creative comes into your life. You start that company, you co-found that company. How does that transition happen?
So, I guess the same situation of how the band started, to be honest. It really was kind of on a whim. So, myself, obviously we were doing the whole touring circuit, and that really was my main focus. And, if you would have asked me when I was 16, 15 years old, what would be going on, would this be here? I would have no answer nearly close to what is actual reality right now. So, myself and Joe, my co-founder, he was in the music industry too. That's how we met. And so we were both in different projects, but we were also kind of both the business leaders of it. And we were doing all of the creative design, and we were doing all of the marketing for it. And so more specifically, for my project, because we were hitting the road a little bit harder, that's when all the major labels were really starting to crash. The only real source of revenue for musicians at that time, honestly, was merchandising, and all of the labels were getting a little bit smarter or more predatory, I guess, at that point, and they were trying to roll out deals that were kind of deemed these 360 deals, which means they were taking 360 degrees of basically any part that they could take. So that was your touring, that was your licensing, that was your merchandising, anything that they could sink their teeth into. And so, we weren't selling millions and millions of records. And, at that point when we were touring, we were realizing that, we were making a very small amount of guarantee money from each show. And what was honestly keeping us alive and just moving us show to show was just the merchandise sales. So we were specifically, I was doing all the designs, and we were just sourcing all the apparel and merch to a company in Chicago. And, we'd get the orders back, and colors would be wrong, and, the production quality would be bad. And, coming from, I have, kind of a handful of different degrees in the design world from DePaul. And, I was looking at it as like, I'm tired of having to wait for this company and, getting orders late, getting them screwed up. So I picked up a beginning screen printing kit, basically from Blick Art Materials or whatever it was called back then. And I remember calling Joe, my partner, around Christmas, and he had just gotten one for Christmas or just bought one, and basically just said, "Hey, I just picked this up. Would you be into trying to, I'm sure we can figure this out. It's not rocket science." And he literally said, "I just got the exact same one, so let's try to mess around with it." And that literally was what kind of started the entire situation. And so we were going at it really hard just in his basement. And my Lift Point was doing a big CD release at Metro coming up. And it honestly wasn't until like Friday at around midnight that we even had our first successful print, because we really had no idea what we were doing. And I had just grabbed a bunch of random blank apparel from Target. And, as soon as we got our first print, we just went to town and we printed everything. I brought it to the show on Saturday. We sold out of everything. And, at that moment, we kind of went back and said, okay, well, here's all the money that, we made for the band on selling the merch. And here's all the money, to take back to pay for whatever the overhead was for that. And that was kind of another aha moment of like, well, wait, this is kind of confusing. We made money as a band and there's money that is left over here for us to take back and figure that out. So that was, that really kind of just started to really push everything to motion. I mean, we had so many contacts in the music industry and everybody was really having the same pain points of, getting just terrible customer service, terrible quality, and not really having that, that grassroots relationship with them. So, we just started to roll it out and said, hey, we can give you better quality. We can give you better service. And, we're really going to do this, from the ground up. We have a background in this. We're comfortable in this industry. And, that kind of mentality really started to apply across all the industries that we deal with. And, as soon as word started to get out there, I mean, that's when all of our growth to this point really has been genuinely organic, because, people just love the relationships. They love that, we have a team of people who are highly educated and really passionate, about what we're doing and trying to bring to the table for the industry.
Back with more Discover Your Inner Awesome in just a moment. But first, are you an early stage startup? If so, you're probably running on the messaging treadmill, where you're trying to figure out how to pitch your company, how to tell the story, how to communicate, market, and sell this thing that you've built. But for every step you take forward, you get pulled back one, just like you're on a treadmill, because you're either too in the weeds, too technical, or your attention is pulled in too many different directions. Oh, and on top of that, you're facing the everyday mental crisis of being an entrepreneur, where you're thinking to yourself, well, maybe I am crazy. Maybe I should have listened to my family and just gotten that safe and secure 6-figure job. Guess what? It's time to get off the treadmill. Introducing Hype Man Academy, my brand new, affordable, equity-free virtual accelerator designed to build a marketing playbook for your startup so you can confidently pitch investors with a clear and compelling message and go out and market and sell to get your first 10 or 20 or 30 customers. Hype Man Academy is a weekly live online workshop where you work alongside your fellow founders, support and help one another, and get one-on-one access with me through virtual office hours. For information on joining the next cohort, visit startuphypeman.com/hypeman-academy. That's startuphypeman.com/hypeman-academy. Fill out an application and let's discuss. Back now to our regularly scheduled programming.
So for those who don't know, and if they just did not gather from, as you explained it there, Rowboat Creative at the end of the day is branded merchandise and apparel, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, we're doing, we're heavily active in the music industry too, but I mean, we deal with a lot of marketing agencies. We deal with a lot of unique designers and, apparel designers. But in a nutshell, yes, I mean, we're basically a merchandising company, but we deal with custom apparel production and pretty much if you have a logo, if you have something that needs to go on any sort of, paraphernalia, whether that's apparel or hard goods, we basically make that happen.
So you make that departure then, and I'm imagining probably because order fulfillment just starts to pick up, right? That you make the departure away from music, and perhaps maybe the touring life starts to wear on you. Is that sort of what happened?
Yeah, I mean, the business was definitely starting to pick up, but honestly, the bigger departure and kind of just the slowing down of that was because At that point, I was 10, 12 years into it pretty hard. And it was a really bad climate and atmosphere to be in the music industry. I mean, I think it still is. As much as I love the industry, it's just a very, very, very tough thing to do, for so many reasons. But specifically around that time, just because, I mean, we had a lot of label interest, and we had, all that sort of stuff happening, but nobody wanted to make any moves because all the majors were folding. That's when, all the Napster stuff and, Spotify hadn't even launched yet, but no one knew what to do anymore. So it was kind of like everybody was just sitting and waiting. And, I remember coming off of, what was our last bigger tour. And I remember just sitting down and pretty specifically having conversation with my dad about this and saying, he asked how the tour was, and I was like, it was great, great shows, great crowds, and, just great experience. We were touring with one of my biggest role models and influences. And I wasn't happy with it. I wasn't happy with the way that it was turning my relationships, whether that was, with just friends and family or whoever that was, because I felt like the industry, it points you in a direction where you very single-handedly are kind of just, you're out there looking for what the next opportunity is. And I found myself, the people that were surrounding us and I was surrounding myself with was, they were friends, but they were just kind of they were friends that either needed something else or they had a means to an end for something for us. And it was just really tough because we would have all of our support system come, to our Chicago shows. And I felt like I didn't have enough time to really even have a chance to say thank you and hang out with them because I was more focused on, wanting to talk to the fans and, trying to grow that base. And I kind of just lost sight of what it was, and writing and rehearsing kind of started to become more of a chore. And that conversation with as I said, my dad he knows how to play a gazillion different instruments, and I would watch him sit on the front porch and play mandolin and mandocello for hours and hours. And I would come out and just ask him, why, what are you doing? Like, are you writing material? And he's like, no, I'm just playing. And that concept had, escaped me for so many reasons. And every time I sat down, at the piano or with a guitar, I felt like I was writing for something specific that, we have to write for the next single. We have to write for the next song that could be for placement. And I just felt like I completely lost sight of, the reason for, being able to have the talent to be able to play. So, it was kind of just I guess, immaculate timing that the business, was really starting to take form of something too. But I think I needed just a breather from that because I'm so passionate about art. I'm so passionate about music and anything that I really put myself into 100%. And I just felt like I kind of started to lose my way in that realm. So I needed a breather from it, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. So then as Rowboat picks up, the business started in 2006, right? We're in 2018 now. Has it been the same consistent business for the last 12, 13 years, or have you had to face any pivots with Rowboat?
I mean, we've stayed the course. If anything, we've kind of just like expanded, I guess, our course a little bit more. I think the main pivot points, for us business wise has just been constantly, getting over the first main pivot point was getting out of the basement. I mean, we had, it was great because rent was free. But, we got to the point where we had, freight trucks dropping off pallets, and they knew specifically that they couldn't be dropping off to residential. So, fortunately we had some very cool delivery guys, that were cool with it for a little bit. But I mean, we were in my partner Joe's house, and I mean, we were just boxes to the ceiling. We couldn't, there was no more space to do anything. And it was still just us two. And I mean, he was still working his other job at a time. So, we were kind of just burning the candle at all ends. So the first big pivot point, honestly, was, kind of just mustering up the belief and the balls to get out of there. And ironically, we went to where our first facility was. I was just kind of doing a walkthrough to potentially rent for another rehearsal space for the other music project that I was starting to work on. And it ended up just being a situation. It was where we could kind of put our feet down. And so we started in just about 1,000 square feet there. And it was still just Joe and I kind of doing our whole thing. And, about a year into it from there, it became kind of another pivot point of adding an employee. And I mean, that was just, a completely scary moment for us because one, we didn't even know what that person was going to do. We needed help, but, we had never walked into this. It wasn't like we came from, these big corporate settings and, we had been used to being someone's boss and, we just wanted to make cool shit at a certain point. So, that was, I guess those were the most significant points, right along that way. And then, we've continued to pivoted. I mean, we were in that facility for about 8 years, and we just moved this last year, and we went from about 7,000 square feet to a little over 60,000. And so that was a bit of an undertaking too. And, just continuing to pivot and understand that, there's going to be these moments, we call it kind of just running into the fire. And sometimes that's just the best way to do it, because you have one mental, option basically is we're going to make this work or it's not going to work. And so then you're kind of left just to making it work.
Yeah. And, as you talk about some of these examples here, getting out of the basement being sort of exhibit A, pivot one, I know you had to do it because, like you said, they can't be delivering pallets to residential addresses. But
right.
At the same time, like, your overhead increases so significantly as a result of that, right? So you go from your margins being significantly reduced because you're rent free to having to pay rent and perhaps a decent amount of rent. So
right.
What goes into that decision? Like, I know you have to make the decision, but then what goes into the decision-making process around how much can we spend? How much do we really need? Or are you just kind of like, we just need to find something?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great point, because I mean, even, when we were making the decision to make the jump from our previous facility to our current, I mean, that was a very serious conversation, and we both sat down, and it was, look, we're doing well where we are at this altitude. Do we want to go harder? Do we want to continue to grow this? And is this still just in our pipeline of, what our bigger mission and our bigger dream is about this? And, we kind of consistently are saying, we're just going to continue to go hard while we still have, our youthful energy and all that as much as we can. But, like you said, I mean, that's a really good point. I mean, we could have just not chosen to move. And at that point, we could have, I just don't think we would have been able to continue to grow because we didn't have the capacity there. I mean, we were so overrun just by the size of orders that, we would have just kind of started to have to scale back a little bit. But I don't know. I mean, I think we both collectively felt that, our job, trying to push this industry forward and trying to just continue on with what we set out to do is not over yet. So until we get to that point, where we're just, I guess, stretched to too many lengths, we'll continue to do it. And we're also, I mean, we're not as green as we were back then because, we're a little bit more seasoned in it. And so we're doing things more intelligently and trying to make sure that, the infrastructure is there and that, we really create a great sense of culture and what everybody wants to be there for. We're just not, I could go on a completely different tangent about how we're really trying to flip the industry on its head and this whole misconception of how the manufacturing industry is, and thinking that that the manufacturing industry is just kind of this end road. If you didn't have opportunity to go to college, if you don't really know what to do, and you have to work in this dark, dingy factory, and there's no more opportunity in life for you, and that is kind of the complete opposite. And we do a lot of programs with the city. We do a lot kind of industry wise to bring in anybody who, who's interested in this aspect of it. And yes, it is production. Yes, there's manufacturing involved too, but we're trying to flip it on its head and show that, this is a really interesting and cool atmosphere to work in. And we're all working together as a team to, create, whether that's designs for, production for the Cubs, production for individual designers, production for, big box corporations that are just out there in the world. So, I mean, there's kind of a lot that goes into it, but I think that moment of, making that next decision just came down to, the fact that we weren't done yet. So, let's just go big or go home.
Yeah. And, some of the couple things you said that I want to just elaborate on, and feel free to chime in as I say this here. So you talked about how, like, specifically with the move to an actual office/warehouse, like, you needed to do that to be able to grow. And I think this is a really important point here, because this is why pivots happen, right? Like, your growth is stalled or it's going backwards. So you have to make a change in order to ultimately grow the business. And right. Something, I've kind of learned the hard way this year is, like, I'm going through a pivot myself right now, but even with that, the reason why, and this may seem like business 101, but I think a lot of people may overlook it, because I overlooked it, is you pretty much have to grow your revenue every year. And here's why, because let's say in a given year, just to use like even numbers, let's say a company makes in a year $100,000. Okay. Mm-hmm. But you got to factor in taxes on that. We'll just say roughly $30,000 in taxes. Okay. So you really only netted 70,000 at the end of the day.
Right.
And you're going to have to pay that off. So if you only do 70,000 the next year, you're already paying the 30,000 from the previous year to the IRS. Plus now you're going to probably pay about 10 to 12,000 on this 70,000. So now you're only netting like you can essentially, if you don't grow, you can essentially tax yourself out of a business at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And
isn't that lovely?
Yeah. And again, like I got hit with a huge tax in April, and I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And that's been, a big contributing factor to where, I'm pivoting now to, and part of it is a rebrand to the Startup Hype Man name, adding services, creating a self-service product for earlier stage companies. And, part of that was driven by just realizing, like, I can't keep going at the same rate. The other thing is that I realized, and it's something I had always known, it just took that tax thing to really trigger me to action, is
right.
I had not had a sustainable business model. I created and provided a really good service that people were willing to pay for, but as a business model, it's not sustainable because it's entirely reliant on my own time, energy, and resources, which is where I'm like, okay, I have to make some changes here. So when we sort of like come back to this larger topic here of surviving the pivot, we've just identified when you pivot, but in terms of surviving it, what's some advice you have to be able to get through this?
I mean, I think, you're in the thick of it right now, but I think that, before we even get into that, I think that it's just super important to understand that that's, and you can also speak on this too, that there's no sense that that's any part of failure. It's just about realizing that, okay, well, you're just looking at it from a little bit more of an intelligent angle. I mean, even if it is failure in some sense, who cares? I mean, it doesn't, no one is reporting to some big failure, principal at a certain point. Yeah. Failure boss. So I think, I don't know. I mean, I guess my advice in all those situations are just to really keep the course. I mean, there's no one out there that is going to be able to give you the advice. There's no one out there with the crystal ball that is going to say that this is going to work. And, as kind of cliche and cheesy as that sounds, that is just what's internally in you. And I think that however that's, been built from years of experience or, years of failure, years of success, whatever that is too, I think that those are just the important things just to understand. I mean, I do I do a lot of triathlons, I do a lot of races, and I do a lot of individual training. And I think that those moments to me, I mean, yes, I came, kind of from an athletic background, but those moments to me are just so applicable across the world of, business and everything in life, that when you set your mind to something, that there should be nobody that can break that. If you just decide, I'm going to conquer this, I'm going to do this, and this is what it's going to be, then, that is, at least to me, that's all that I need. And yeah, you can have support and you can have, cheerleaders along the way for it. But I think that's the biggest thing. And just, mentally setting some time for you to pick and choose what is that goal. If it is that pivot moment, okay, this is not working, or I'm finding these pain points, or here are these hurdles, step back from everything, knock everything down, metaphysically and, or physically, whatever you need to do. But, step away from everything and just sit down and put everything down in the ground and just say that, am I passionate about this? Am I happy with where this is going? If this continues on this path for 5 years, am I going to be happy with this? How can I just start to be in control of that destiny and just kind of creating and, controlling your destiny? I mean, that's kind of the quintessential, how many business entrepreneurial books talk about that? And, Tony Robbins-esque, and hopefully I'm not misread as one of those people, but, but I mean, I have a lot of great things to say about that too, but, I think there's a lot of misconception about that too. But, I think that, I don't know. I mean, you just have to be true to yourself, and you have to be true to your beliefs. And if you have, partners in that, you have to all be aligned in that and going 100% in that right direction, and knowing that you are going to hit the hurdles. You're going to hit the deep end. You're going to hit fires, and, it's okay, fine, pivot and run around the fire then, or, just go right through the fire and, just keep moving and keep moving, I guess.
We are getting towards the end of our episode here. Before we wrap up, can you let our listeners know where they can learn more about Rowboat Creative, where they can learn more about you, find you, get in touch with you?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, again, thank you for having me. I mean, any of these opportunities to, to be able to talk to one person, whether it's just a conversation between you and I, or, anybody listening, or anybody, hopefully inspired. I mean, I always like to step back from any of these moments and just preface it and say that I don't really care if anybody, ever remembers my name, remembers the company. Of course, I'd love for you to remember the company and remember my name, and, do great things with us too. But, if there's one thing that anybody just takes away from it and walks away from, is that, I remember hearing something interesting from some interesting guy somewhere. So, me personally, I'm on social media, on Instagram is Lucas Ideas. That's where I have kind of some of my other photography, and all my personal stuff too. But Rowboat Creative, www.rowboatcreative.com. Not that I need to say www anymore in 2018, but rowboatcreative.com. I'm on LinkedIn as well, Lucas Guariglia. And we're Chicago based, so we're always open to talk ideas and talk opportunities with anybody, or if there's anybody who just wants to kind of talk shop about anything we talked about. I'm always all ears, and I know I told you, Raj, that I'm the Italian guy, so I could talk for hours and hours about everything, especially if I'm passionate about it. So don't get me started on business or music, because it'll go for 5 hours.
And for everyone listening, if you missed any of the sort of where to find Lucas, you can always find it. We link it up in the show notes every episode on our website. So to close up, the way we end our shows is by doing a sort of wrap up and giving what we believe, based on our conversation today, is our respective answer to this topic question: how do you survive a pivot? I'll go first, and then I'll serve it up to you, Lucas. So
sure.
The topic being, how do you survive a pivot? I believe, after listening to you talk and reflecting on my own experience, my answer for this, and as I bring up again that, I got hit with the tax, and that kind of forced me to do something different. And I think in your case, you had these pallets coming, and they were like, we can't do this anymore.
All right.
I think first off, if I were to do this over, if I were to rewind a little bit, I wouldn't wait for the hammer to drop. So I think there are things you can recognize are happening, things you can feel as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, that you're like, this might become an issue later on. But until it becomes so grave an issue, I think we have a tendency to just be like, yeah, I'll deal with it later.
Absolutely.
And I think the earlier we can recognize that it's something that it's like, something doesn't feel right here, something's not totally working, and really make a concerted effort to make that pivot earlier, I think we'll all be better off in the end as a result.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I'm done. Go ahead. You tell me your answer. Yeah. How do you survive a pivot?
No, I think you have to be perceptive. In anything, whether you're riding the train or, walking in a different area of the world that you have no idea. You just got to be, kind of open to your surroundings and perceptive. And, I think that applies to the business atmosphere and climate, as well. There's certain things that you can see coming, and there's certain things that you just absolutely cannot. And I think that you just have to be braced at all points, that, whether that's in your focus and, just always being prepared, because who knows? The building could burn down tomorrow. Shirts and, apparel could no longer be cool. We could go into a complete nudist, world for the rest of life. And so then we're kind of,
then you'll become a tattoo parlor.
Right. Exactly. I'll bring shirts back. But I think, just prepping and just being there. And, when the hammer does drop, if you can do your best to really kind of start to focus on, being prepared for if it does drop. But when it does drop, just knowing that, okay, that's fine. Let's just figure out a way to pick up the hammer, or just figure out a way to move around the hammer, I guess. That's kind of just my biggest insight, just don't be afraid of when that hammer is going to drop, because at a certain point, something's going to happen. Shit's going to hit the fan eventually somewhere. But, I think any entrepreneur that is out there, anybody that is trying to carve a different path, anybody who's looking to take a different road, just have to be prepared, and probably somewhere along the lines has already prepared themselves, knowing that, it's not going to be easy. And there really are no answers. You can read a billion different business books, and you can listen to a million different podcasts. But, just as I said, all my information and insight, could be completely nonsense to somebody, because your path is going to be completely different from many of ours. So, I think just be steadfast and just, kind of roll with the punches, and know that, if you get hit hard, then that's it. Just, either come back and hit harder, or figure out that you don't want to be in a game that hits that hard, and then, maybe pivot and go to something else with some foam involved, maybe.
Lucas Guariglia, rock star extraordinaire, co-founder, president, director of sales for Rowboat Creative, and also known as some guy with some piece of advice somewhere along the way.
Some Italian guy.
Thank you for joining us and actually kicking off season 10 of the podcast with us.
Yeah, Raj, thank you very much. Like I said, I really appreciate the time, and hopefully anybody out there listening, let's do something great together.
That wrapped up our conversation. Did you, the listener, enjoy this episode? If so, the absolute best compliment you can give is a rating and review on iTunes. Ratings and reviews help more people find the show, therefore more people can discover their inner awesome. And if you want to extend that compliment further, while you're leaving that review, go ahead and subscribe to the show on whatever platform you listen, whether that's iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or the various other networks in which you can find this show. For full show notes, references, and resources, as well as access to the over 100 episode archive, visit the podcast official site, www.discoveryourinnerawesome.com. And remember, for tips, strategies, and ideas on how to build up your company's hype with a message that sings, visit startuphypeman.com. Season 10's theme song is from Sir the Baptist. The song is called Dance with the Devil. It is off his album Saint or Sinner, which you can grab on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Music, and anywhere else digital music is distributed. That'll tie a bow on this one. Thank you again to this week's guest for joining us. I am Raj Nation. You have been listening to Startup Hype Man's Discover Your Inner Awesome podcast. We will see you next time, but in the meantime, take care and be awesome today.
This a dance with the devil, It's a dance with the devil. And if you can't get enough, then
it's a dance with the devil.